Hello and welcome to Off My Shelves, and this is a one-off episode where I'm going to look at the 35 things I love most about this book right here, Watchmen. So let's get underway. For those of you who don't know, Watchmen is 35 years old this year. It started being published in single issues back in September 1986, and why not then use that as an excuse to talk about 35 things that I love about this book. So we will get started as soon as possible because there's 35 things and I gotta get cracking. First and foremost, the graphic design of the book itself, and namely the choice of the yellow and black high contrasting colours, the font used for Watchmen itself, and the stylistic choice of having the banner going down the side with the image then going down the opposite side. On a shelf, when you see Watchmen either as an absolute or as an individual issue or trade paperback, you can't mistake it. It's got such a strong graphic design behind it. Talking about the graphic design on the front cover and other things like that, brings me to the covers themselves, because the covers of all the original 12 individual issues are just some of the best drawing that you'll see, really. And again, the way it's set up, this kind of sidebar going down with pure chapter 1, but in the originals it'd be Watchmen, and then this image, so unique and so different. Number 3 is actually the cover is the first panel of every book. You can see it more clearly in the absolute editions because it goes right into the page, but even when I read it in other formats, I did notice it, that every cover is actually the first panel of the book. It's almost like an extreme close-up of the image, and then when you go into the book it pans out and begins to go more in depth into the story. Number 4, Dave Gibbons. Often Alan Moore's name gets associated with this more than Dave Gibbons, but for my money, when I read it and reread it and reread it, Dave Gibbons' art is the one thing that gets more depth and more appreciation every time I go through it. And people talk about the writing being quite in-depth, but the art has got such depth. There's so much going on in every little panel, and the way he utilises simplistic panel layout to really give the story massive impact is astounding. The way that every character, even people on the street, have got a unique image and body shape to them. I mean, it's just a thing of beauty, I think, from an artistic point of view. And staying with Dave Gibbons for number 5, the lettering. The stuff this book does with the lettering is amazing, and Dave Gibbons is responsible for the lettering. It gives like a unique, interesting, singular voice to certain characters. Just take for instance Rorschach or Dr. Manhattan. The way their word bubbles and fonts are changed and different to everyone else gives a different feel to how you read those boxes and how you interpret that language. And that's same for a lot of other characters. The wording is really used to its fullest, I think, and lettering as a format is used to its fullest in this book. Then we obviously get to number 6, which is Alan Moore himself. The writing of Alan Moore in this book is sublime, as you might imagine, really. It has got a lot of depth to it. It is a little wordy, if you want to put it that way, but it never gets boring or never gets off-putting, for me at least. And certainly even when he goes in depth into the extra bits of world building at the end of each chapter, each of them have their own unique voice. So when you read something that's written by a policeman or written by a psychiatrist, it actually feels like a different person writing it. Like there's a section where it's written by a journalist, and that doesn't feel like Alan Moore's writing. It feels like a journalist writing. Each of them have got their own different voices, really, which is not easy to do. And through his writing, he is able to do that, I think. And yeah, it's fantastic. Number 7, John Higgins, the colorist. Now, even from the earliest pages, you can see how good the colorist is, because John Higgins uses these high contrasting, impactful primary colours to tell the story in a better way. I mean, the comedian's murder at the start shows you all you need to know on that front, where it's flashing in between the murder scene happening and the modern day, and each panel where the murder scene happening is starkly in different shades of really deep red, and yet that happens throughout the book, and the colouring is superb on every level. And on to number 8 is the chapter headings. I love the little chapter headings because when I read these originally, some of the chapter headings sounded familiar, and I was like, where have I heard that before? And they were just interesting ways of introducing a different theme or different voice into the book, really. But then number 9 is the payoff for the chapter headers, because at the end of each chapter it actually tells you where that chapter heading came from. It gives you the full quote of the person person that they took it from. The first issue is Bob Dylan, for instance, and then you've got Elvis Costello, you've got Einstein, you've got Parchment Bible, loads of different things going on, but I love that. Number 10, staying with the quotes, the 12th issue actually finishes with a quote from John Cale. For those of you who don't know who John Cale is, John Cale was in the band Velvet Underground, and he is a Welshman, so that gets love from me. Watchmen finishes off with a quote from a Welshman. Obviously, I'm going to give love to that. Number 11 is the murder of the comedian himself. The opening chapters, the story that brings everyone in, really. This brutal murder of this mysterious superhero being investigated almost immediately by another mysterious superhero. The setup is basically what I'm saying. I love the setup of this book because it instantly intrigued me and brought me in, and yeah, I loved it. Number 12 is a controversial one because I don't know how many people read these, but the closing documents. The closing documents of each chapter I absolutely adore, every one of them, with maybe one exception of Night Owl's one where he talks about birds and things like that. It's still good, but nowhere near as good as all the rest. But yeah, I love the closing documents because they fill out the world so deeply and richly. Number 13 is one of those closing documents, Under the Hood. The sections from Under the Hood, which is the biography of Hollis Mason, who is the original Night Owl, is fabulous. Him talking about the formation of himself as Night Owl and the Minutemen and all that history, it's just great. Number 14 is staying with those extra documents, and it's essentially the Rorschach documents, the psychiatric documents and the police reports and the letters in particular, because what this little extra bit does is it unveils letters written by a child Rorschach, Walter Kovacs as he was then rather. He was writing letters about his life, and they are just heart-wrenchingly tragic, and you can see how this man, who is just unlovable totally in this book, yeah, he's a cool character, but he is just an obnoxiously horrible, character who hates the world around him, and you can see how he was formed from a very early age through abuse and through those letters, and they really add a lot of depth to the character, I think. 15 is the flashbacks. The flashbacks in this book are great, and every flashback you have adds a little bit to the story. It allows the story to keep this forward momentum going, but then it jumps back and forth and really fleshes that world out, both on a little individual basis, like Rorschach's child abuse by his mother and things like that, and then the Minutemen having all of their adventures. The flashbacks are just great. And 16 is actually the Minutemen flashbacks specifically. I would love a book with just the Minutemen flashbacks, all self-contained, because every time they finish the flashbacks to the Minutemen, this earlier group of superheroes, I'm left wanting more. I want to know more about all these different characters and what happened in their lives, and yeah, I want more. And also number 17 is the Vietnam flashback, because I find that fascinating in this book, because it explores the idea of now Dr. Manhattan is being created, this all-powerful superhuman that's been created accidentally through an atomic experiment. If he was alive and Vietnam started, how would he affect Vietnam, and what would Vietnam look like with that superhero in place on America's side? And this book explores that, and it explores it in a really interesting way. And on that front, number 18 is actually simply the book has got futuristic elements, but it's not futuristic in feeling, so it's got alternative kind of histories of Vietnam and things like that. But also, because of the advent of Dr. Manhattan, technology has been sped up in this world, so the cigarettes they smoke in are slightly different, the cars they're using, they plug in for energy, and there's lots of little subtle futuristic kind of hints as to this new world and what they're living in now with Dr. Manhattan in existence in the world. And I love that it doesn't really over-egg it just subtly layers them in. Number 19 is Night Owl Hollis Mason. I love Night Owl Hollis Mason as a character, and what happens to him in this book is heart-wrenching and really hits you, because he's just such a simple, straightforward character, and you don't want anything bad to happen to him, and normally those are the characters the bad stuff happens to, really. Number 20 is Night Owl Dan Dryberg, if that's how you pronounce it, and yeah, the second Night Owl I love, because his arc and his development in this book is probably the most significant character out of anyone, because he starts off really beaten and really downhearted, lacking self-confidence massively, because they brought in this act banning superhero activity, and so he's just hung up his night owl costume and given up, and he really does just feel absolutely empty as a person. But then when he puts that outfit back on, man, the character change is almost immediate, and he starts really burning and firing on all cylinders, and it's great to see. And when you reread it, you really get more and more of an appreciation for Night Owl's character, I think. Number 21 is Rorschach's mask. Specifically, how Rorschach's mask is just an astoundingly great visual thing to have, but more importantly, how it came from a lady's dress. And I love that, how this amazingly impactful image frightening the underworld of New York was actually cut from a woman's dress using Dr. Manhattan's fabric. I think that little touch was great. Number 22, staying with Rorschach, is how he jumps out of a fridge in one part to surprise one of the characters. Now, I don't know in what world Rorschach is living, but he didn't need to be hiding in a fridge. And what if the guy didn't come home? But either way, I love the fact that he jumps out of a fridge. Number 23 is definitely a controversial one, because it's the Tales of the Black Freighter storyline. Now that is the comic within a comic, as it's known, because one of the characters who is sitting on the pavement and the sidewalk in this story is reading a comic, and we go in depth into that comic at different points, and it's this pirate story that's all revolving around a person who's been marooned on an island and is trying to find his way back. Now lots of people read in depth into this story, but however you want to look at it, whatever analogies you want to bring from it, it doesn't matter. Either way, I really enjoy the Tales from the Black Freighter. Number 24 is Dr. Manhattan. I love Dr. Manhattan because he's one of these absolutely crazy characters who every time the book goes forward, he seems to lose more and more of his humanity and his empathy, and his personality and his priorities change. And so he's a really interesting character because he can essentially do anything, but it's whether he wants to do something or not. As a character, he's great, I think, Dr. Manhattan. Number 25 is the multiple Manhattan scene as well, where he is actually doing some scientific investigation in one room, and he's got 2 or 3 guys trying to make love to his girlfriend in another room. That was really freaky and eerie, and the fact that he didn't see anything wrong with that made it even more interesting to me. Number 26 is the Hooded Justice character. Now, the Hooded Justice character gets really fleshed out in the add-on documents to the back, but he is one of these characters who every time I read this book, I'm like, oh, I want a single Hooded Justice story written by Alan Moore and drawn by Dave Gibbons. No one else. I don't want anyone else's opinion on it, but I wanted more of that character, and he was one of those that really intrigued me massively. 27 is the Hooded Justice actually getting in and beating up comedian for what he did to Sally Jupiter. He walks in on a comedian raping one of his colleagues, Sally Jupiter, and literally he beats him down, and it is so rewarding to see that beating, really, because it was a long time coming for the comedian, and the more abuse the comedian got in this book, the better in general it was, really, because he's not a very likeable guy on any level. Number 28 is Sally Jupiter herself, not Laurie. Laurie is one of those empty characters for me. I do like her more and more every time I read it, but her as a character, Sally Jupiter's daughter, Laurie, has never really gelled too much for me. But her mother, Sally, is great. Whenever she comes back as the older lady and she's looking at like the Tijuana Bibles of her old antics and stuff like that, it's great. 29, staying with the Sally Jupiter family, is the fact that the comedian turns out to be Laurie's father, and when that is revealed, it's a great reveal because you don't really expect it, I don't think, at all. And the fact that Sally Jupiter went back with the comedian after the attempted rape and they had a child together is just so complex and so deep that you want to kind of really think about it and really try to understand the mentality between both people. And yeah, the reveal of that was great. 30 is where that reveal happened, the conversation on Mars between Sally's daughter Laurie and Dr. Manhattan. I love that whole issue because it really is, it's not those two talking, it's like all different voices of humanity over the years debating whether you should or shouldn't intervene on something, and whether it's right or wrong to intervene and to use power that you can use, or should you walk away? It's a massively in-depth debate, really, and it's great that they used pretty much a whole issue to have this back and forth between these two characters. 31 is the doomsday clock itself ticking down and getting more soaked with blood with each issue. It's a great little addition to the book, and it just keeps that pressure and the forward momentum of the story going, I think. Number 32 is The Island and the Plan by Ozymandias, and yeah, it's an insane plan. The fact that the overall plan and end product of this is to get a group of people together, writers, artists, scientists, a cloned brain of a medium, and all these different things. You gather all these people and all these things on an island, you tell them they're making a movie, you tell other people something, and eventually the idea is to create a fake monster that is going to convince the world that there is an enemy outside of themselves to fight against. And the idea of this plan is so off the wall and so outdated and so bonkers. 33 is that silly space monster itself. I love the fact that there's this big reveal later on in the book of devastation, absolute carnage in New York, and then you turn the page and you do get hints of it early on in the book of what it looks like, but then you see this fake space monster that has just devastated the city, and it's just sitting there motionless, really, because it died on impact. I just love the fact that this tentacle space monster being is the one responsible for all these deaths. It's just crazy. Number 34 is the fact that the hero of the book is also the villain of the book, because the person who came up with that plan, Ozymandias, actually does become the heroic person, because even though he's killed all these millions of people, he's actually united the world, and they have stopped this nuclear warfare. They have stopped walking towards mutual destruction through nuclear means, and that was all he was after. So the villain that they're trying to stop, who killed the comedian, who set up this whole world, who killed all these people in New York, they can't do anything about, because he actually achieved something they could never achieve. He saved the world. And that's brilliant. And that leaves you always debating the end and debating the ins and outs of the characters and the story, which is what you should do about a piece of art, really, is talk about it. And 35, the fact that Rorschach comes in right to the end with his journal that he wrote about all his investigations, about how Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, is behind the plot, how his journal is now in the hands of the right-wing press, and you don't know if they print it, if they do anything with it, but I love the fact that all of that complex plan, all the years of planning, the in-depth, complex thought gone into it, is just undercut with a bitter Rorschach's diary being posted to the press. And who knows whether it did undercut it, and who knows for the aftermath, because that's why it leaves it. But they are my 35 things that I love about Watchmen. Definitely, by all means, in the comments below, tell me what you love about Watchmen. If anything, if you don't like it, that's totally fine. I don't know why you would have gone this far if you don't like it. Maybe I convinced you to like it, I don't know. But either way, thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.